It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Hey, Irwin.
I will tell you, I just love saying this name, and it's going to really roll off my tongue, okay? And I'm going to give you the whole title. This, by the way, Our Hamptons audience, this will probably be the actual working title of this episode because it's poetic in its own way. Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy Onassis, pause, of East Hampton.
And there you have it, folks. And we're done. No.
And we're done. But now, look, Jackie Onassis, she's an American icon in so many ways, and we'll get into
Oh, gosh, yeah. I mean, what, don't you think there are women that still try to emulate her in some way, right?
Completely true. Yes. Completely true. She had the look, and again, while I was alive during, at the time JFK was shot, barely, I was 5 years old, but, they speak of how that was Camelot. I mean, this was a woman.
Right. I was just going to say, she was the queen of Camelot.
She was the queen of Camelot, and 32 years old in the White House. I mean, I have daughters older than that.
Right.
I mean, it's unimaginable.
Yeah. It's like nowadays you think of it, it's like a child in the White House.
Exactly. Like, but again, and this is really not the storyline we're going to get into today, but you can't deny the grace that she brought, the elegance as a 32-year-old woman.
Yeah.
I mean, it was extraordinary. It was an extraordinary time. I mean, again, I was 5 years old. I don't really remember it. I do remember my mother telling me, wow, what a diversion. My mother telling me we were actually in a Key Food supermarket on Hillside Avenue in Queens.
People
and I was
remember, right?
Yeah. Everyone remembers this. And that's when they announced it over the PA. And my mother would tell me just, the whole place broke out crying, like
incredible, right?
Incredible story. But we're getting off the beaten track because the real storyline here
is the ...
is the
East Hampton.
Yes, Esperanza. Another excellent segue. And not only, and this is, yes, they had a house in East Hampton, but Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy Onassis was born in Southampton Hospital. July 28th, 1929. She arrived 6 weeks late. Now, the birth, and we're getting a lot of this information from a book by Sarah Bradford called From America's Queen, and just has a lot of great information, especially about her time in East Hampton. She was scheduled, they were planning on, these people had a house on Park Avenue also, but they were planning on having the baby, but 6 weeks late, they said, hey, maybe it's not happening. We're going out to East Hampton. And that's what they did.
I would say it was summer and it was hot.
Yeah.
As HE double hockey sticks, as my son would say.
Right.
And they said, we're going to the country. We're going to the sea.
I would say that was
cool
the
breezes
argument.
Prevailed.
I would say that's probably the storyline for sure. And so Jackie was the first child of Janet Norton Lee and John Vernew Bouvier III. Both of her grandparents owned big summer houses nearby. I love this line in the book, Esperanza, because I mean, honestly, remember this book is going back, talking about 1929 East Hampton.
Right. And how nothing changes.
And how nothing changes because Ms. Bradford in this book refers to it as a virtual Wall Street by the sea.
Yeah.
We've heard the commentary about Sagaponack on Goldman Pond after Goldman Sachs.
Yes, this is Wall Street, there. The Hamptons being Wall Street's playground.
Exactly. We've heard that a million. Yeah,
overused.
Completely overused, but yet that was how she put this in here. And but again, and Esperanza, it's so interesting. We always get to this time, and like this is a storyline and a timeline that's repeated in the past. A lot of the things that were happened right around the Depression and the crash.
Yes.
Okay, now this was, this was 29. Now, a few months later, there was the stock market crash, October of that year. The Bouvier family fortunes, another sense of, define what that was, took a hit like
Right.
everyone's did. But interestingly, Ms. Bradford Reef says how this sort of gave Jackie and her younger sister, Lee Radziwill, Lee Bouvier Radziwill, they had almost their entire lives this sense of insecurity and this fear of poverty.
Right. Which is not necessarily a bad thing to have. Like we call that a Depression era mentality, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, right, we've seen this, people of significant means,
still
acting
frugal.
rather frugal, and
exactly.
cautious.
Mindful of their money.
Exactly. I mean, hey, listen, I think
I
about
I respect that.
I think about the rainy day. I mean, I'm down with that. But we also have to mention their house, which is really another great part of the story. It was, it's a famous house, Lasata. And this is a house. It's right on Further Lane. If everyone that's driven on Further Lane, certainly will recognize this house. It's stucco, ivy clad, right near the ocean. Esperanza, you mentioned, just to the east of the Maidstone Club.
Right. Yeah. It's almost right on the part of the course, really. Yeah. Very close.
Which was what their social life was all about. The Bouviers, and again, going back, the grandfather, Grampy Jack, John Bouvier Jr., John Vernew Bouvier Jr., was known as the Major. And, at Lasata, as Ms. Bradford writes, the Major was not only the undisputed head of the household, but a personage in the village of East Hampton as well. Here's a familiar line: as a former trial lawyer, he liked the sound of his own voice.
What a surprise.
We love attorneys on our Hamptons. We're not, but this is Ms. Bradford's words, not ours.
Yeah. But I love that he was involved in the, really
completely
involved in the village's social life. They
were about community, Esperanza.
Yes.
I mean, apparently, and we'll get into that when we talk about Jackie with the horseback riding and everything else. But he was fond of the sound of his own voice, would regularly deliver Memorial Day celebration speeches in East Hampton, the traditional opening of the summer season. So, and again, here's the parts that Esperanza and I'm going to speak for Esperanza because I think she agrees, we really love when so evocative of transporting ourselves to a time and place, something we try to do on our Hamptons. When they arrived in East Hampton as summer visitors in 1912, so this is many years before they bought it. Well, I guess the Major had a house here, but not the kids. The place, and this is right out of the book. The place was still a simple resort compared with the more sophisticated Southampton. Now,
I always think about this because it's partly, I think, just the distance. I would think, Southampton was like the first stop. You would have had a much easier time. Why would you continue going on to the next town?
It completely true. I mean,
especially
back in that era, the very beginning of the automobile. And I think by this time the train was going out, but can't imagine it was going at the speeds it was going now.
Yeah. So, but in that sense, like Southampton was more established earlier on, pre-train even, because of that distance, that gap.
And the size, the village was larger, those factors as well.
That's my assumption.
I think that assumption is probably accurate, but it goes on to say how compared to the more sophisticated house, the houses, there were salt boxes, the duck pond, the village green sheltered by the ocean. But here's the part that really rings true, that inland flat potato fields stretched to the horizon. And Esperanza and I were speaking about this earlier, before we signed on. This was sort of known as the Eastern Plain, east of, we're going to make an imaginary boundary. We're going to call it east of Egypt Lane, and then further, middle, hither, the three streets, really running down to 27. the Eastern Plain was developed after the estate section that we know Esperanza really more by Main Beach.
By Main Beach with like Lily Pond and all that. Yeah. Yeah.
It was older there. I mean, again, not that they weren't.
Yeah, because that was closer to the center of the village. You know, the heart of the village was directly north of that, right?
Correct. Yeah. And you know, I also believe, I think Main Beach was still Main Beach back then. Like, I mean, it was a little bit more of a beach than, you know, the beaches, you know, developed a little bit further to the east. Do you think they had a pavilion there during that era?
I don't remember. I can't remember right now when the pavilion was built, honestly, but you know, it could have been the turn of the century.
Yeah.
I think.
I mean,
I think early, if anything, you know, late 18th, early 19th. I'm not sure.
Because I would. Yeah, I mean, we don't know the answer.
If not, there would have been some kind of coast, you know, like a life-saving station or something.
But I think the term Main Beach was really, it was a very accurate term. I think that was considered the main
beach
of East Hampton.
Yeah. So, and this whole idea of how, you know, these were the flat potato fields, you know, I've told you, that was my experience of Further Lane. You know, it was expanses. You had no trees. You just had open, like what you just described, like a plain.
About your childhood, like when, you know, late 70s, early 80s, you remember this.
This, because I biked this all the time, and I would, you know, this was the corner of 2 Mile Hollow.
Right.
Was a potato field.
Wow. So that's like, and we're talking again, you know,
in the 90s.
I mean, that's right. So, I mean, like you now see that Further Lane farm, which I guess is some sort of
that's the remnant of that.
Right.
Yeah. So all of that on both sides was, you know, pretty much and with the ocean side more built, but really the openness was there.
Right. Like I'm going to say, like the northern side of Further Lane. I mean, those farm fields really extended to where Hither and Middle are.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you know, evocative really of what we spoke about, you know, Wainscot, Sagaponic, you know.
That's what I think of. I think of even today how Wainscot, that vista of the plain, which is what it's called, right? It's what was this must have looked like. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I mean, really, really fascinating. So again, think of that. That's
surrounding this place that they bought,
mean,
right?
Just, you know, I mean, and really you want to talk about what physical beauty, you know, farm fields and ocean. I mean, my gosh, it
was very open. That's what you know, because I remember in my own youth, so I can imagine this was you know, 100 times that.
And to this exact point you're making, Esperanza, you know, the Bouvier's first house was on Appoquog Road, which was more in the more traditional, what we know as the estate section, summer colony of East Hampton. Mm-hmm. But it was 1925 that the Major's wife, Maud Sargent, bought Lasata with her father's money.
She came into a little inheritance.
Apparently. You know, now in 1935, the Major apparently inherited a considerable fortune from his uncle and took over the house, but to the point of how we made a few minutes ago about Jackie and Lee being worried about, always being concerned about poverty, he began to live the expansive life.
Expansive and expensive.
Expansive and expensive. I like that. Yes, you see, you could have written this book. We don't need Sarah Bradford. The expansive and expensive life, courtesy of Esperanza Leon, to which he felt entitled, and which ended at his death in the financial ruin of the family. Remember, this is the kind of thing, this is like generational wealth. And when you blow generational wealth.
Yeah. What is it? You know, I think my father had a mug or a hat like this. It said, "I'm spending my children's inheritance."
Yes. Yeah. Well, apparently the Major did. So, and I don't know if that ultimately hurt his reputation, you know, as, you know, he was such a, real member of the community, but who knows? We don't know that part of the story, but, you know, it's just so interesting, you know, so getting back to Jackie, the heart of the story. I mean, you know, each May, the various Bouvier households, they all lived on Park Avenue, but they all escaped for the summer to East Hampton. They would bring the staff, and Lasata, an Indian name, as she's describing it, a Native American name, we'll say, meant a place of peace And I really like this because sort of fits into that all families have a story, Esperanza. It was a misnomer because as the explosive Bouvier family was concerned, it wasn't
not so peaceful there.
It wasn't always peaceful, but again,
they were a loud Catholic family.
Yeah, apparently, and while
Probably
it stood,
numerous. I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing. Yeah,
I would assume, but I mean, just to the spread was pretty significant. I mean, 12 acres, a tennis court, blackjack. That was Jackie's dad. There was stables for 8 horses, which gets into all of Jackie's later time as the with her horseback riding and everything else. But just again, you talk about the life they would lead in East Hampton. I mean, the father, snappy dresser, his invariable East Hampton Sunday attire was a brown tweed jacket, white shirt with high stiff collar, white linen trousers, black socks and white shoes. Nash convertible tooling around town. I mean, these people were living it, but Esperanza.
So, and I just want to tell you, because it was coming into my head that I remember our dear neighbor when we first moved to East Hampton, Millie Hand. I remember her sharing the story of how, the connection, about blackjack and Jackie Kennedy, right. That was a very present thing for me. And I was trying to recall, and I'm thinking there was a Rowdy Hall connection. And you are familiar with the historic district on Egypt Lane,
of course,
and the building that is the house that is Rowdy Hall.
Absolutely.
Not the restaurant.
Not the restaurant. This is Rowdy Hall and David's Lane, basically.
Right. Yeah. Well, yes, exactly. It's Egypt on the corner of David's, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes. And that would be
little shingle cottage.
It would be right. It would be the southwest corner of Egypt and David's, if I'm not mistaken. Okay.
Yes.
To give our audience a little background.
To my knowledge, that is where Jackie actually lived with her family summers.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Now, Jackie, we're talking about Jackie more latter day Jackie, not Jackie.
No, I think, I don't know. Maybe they just couldn't, maybe the major didn't want, but there is I remember that from conversations with Millie Hand. And then there are articles online that you will find on that.
Interesting.
Did you not know that?
I did not know that. No,
okay. Sorry to surprise you with that.
She likes to surprise me once in a while.
Jogging my memory on this.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. I mean, I didn't turn that up. I mean, Rowdy Hall does have I think that address is 111 Egypt Lane, if I'm not mistaken. I think. I will have to investigate that. It did not turn up. She doesn't mention this, Sarah.
Yeah,
Bradford.
Not in the book, right?
Not in the book. But
surprising.
okay. I can't. So
it wasn't exactly a mansion. Maybe that's why.
No. I mean, it's a beautiful. It's
a traditional timber frame. Yeah, salt box.
Yeah, I mean, it was what they described the East Hampton as, really a place of salt boxes. Evocative of that. If I'm not mistaken, that Egypt Lane Historic District, it's like a series of 3 or 4 houses going south from Rowdy Hall. There was one that was actually moved from Amagansett, I remember, to that property. But getting back to the whole lifestyle, and this is something that has to be said. I'm not going to go out so far as to say these people were living a lie. I'm not saying that, but they were third-generation French immigrants who made good, but and this is Ms. Bradford writing, but felt it necessary to fantasize about their ancestry by converting shopkeepers into nobles. Meaning, yes, they were successful people in France, but not nobility.
Right. They were merchants.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct. But the point of the story was, this was an essential part of Jackie's life, and Lee Radziwill's life. And, it even mentions how, Lee Radziwill owned a home later on East Dune Lanes, same neighborhood, beautiful neighborhood, from 1988 to 2002. So the point is, Lee was, I mean, so this is, Lee was born, whatever, a couple of years after Jackie. So
Yeah, I think
1931,
yeah.
I mean, East Hampton was a presence in her whole life and through at least 2002. I don't know if she's been back since, but she stayed, that was part of her life. And Jackie's, interestingly, I couldn't find an exact timeline of when Jackie got married relatively young. If I'm not, also, I mean, she was in the White House at 32.
Right.
So she was in her 20s when she got married to Jack Kennedy. Because she was, again, 32 as the first lady. But the point is, she married JFK in 50. Well, it's going to tell me. She married JFK in 53 and she was born in 29. So she was 24 years old. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and saying she spent 24 years of her life summering in East Hampton.
Oh, yeah. I think it was a very established sense of place that she had, I'm sure.
Completely. I mean, so she was only
with this area.
She was only 24 years old when she got married. And
those are formative years, by the way. I mean, let's think about it. It's like for me, these are the years that really mark you when you have those experiences of.
No question about it. I mean, and, from our memories, like I always laugh with people, I can reel off baseball statistics when I was 10 or 12 years old. I couldn't tell you who won the World Series last year. I mean, but those memories, again, to your point, I mean, those are formative years.
Yeah.
So she married JFK in 53. And again, they talk about this. It gets back to the whole thing, how she was concerned about not living in poverty and everything else. She relays the story here. She told the Society band leader, Peter Duchin, in reference to Newport, "You and I, Peter, are both outsiders, because, well, they were grand Catholics, Mediterranean descent in a Protestant WASP world. Jackie never found it necessary to be part of a crowd. And she felt, oh, this really rings true to East Hampton, felt an affinity with creative people, artists, oddballs.
It makes me wonder what, was that nature or nurture, right?
Right.
Like, was this something that she was born with, or was it something that was cultivated just with her time out here in nature and the society out here at the time? The simplicity of life in so many ways.
Really great question. Hard to answer. We could speculate. Look, to your point, I think this place was rooted in her, but again, there was baggage. Grandpa lost the money. There was always the fear of poverty and everything else, through her whole life. I mean, look, and it's well documented, the Kennedys, there's a tragic family history. I mean, we don't have to repeat it. Everyone knows it. I mean, Jackie herself died in her early 60s. She was not an old woman, but I like the way this part sort of closes, how it's worth noting that the three most important men in her life, JFK, Boston Irish Catholic, Aristotle Onassis, Greek, and her companion in later years was Maurice Templesman, Jewish. Not one could be remotely be called a WASP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. It's I mean, because one always thinks about this place, East Hampton being this little, WASPy enclave.
Exactly.
But I think we've talked about this. Yes. There was a freedom out here, I think, of expression, of thought that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, that's what I think. That's what the original settlers came for. After all,
it was, and we have touched on this. How, we had an episode about the Signa Gallery, and Esperanza and I were talking during that episode that, you had the city people coming to those openings, but there were probably farmers and fishermen in there too, and it was the same thing, with the Abex artists and the Bonnickers and the fishermen. There was sort of a camaraderie here. And yes, it was a much more conservative place 50, 60 years ago, no question, but there was something to that. But we do have to segue to yet another fascinating part of the story, Esperanza. And again, it does touch on Jackie's, in her head, the fear of poverty and everything else. Because, and I don't know how many people actually know this. I will go on record saying I did not know Jackie was born in Southampton Hospital. I had no clue. But Jackie was also related. I mean, do we all know who Big Edie and Little Edie Beale are?
Right. Grey Gardens.
Grey Gardens. I mean, this is now Grey Gardens, and this is not, Grey Gardens has been well documented in film and documentaries. The Mayle brothers made a very, big documentary about a few years back. We're not going to get too deep in the weeds, but the background of the story, Esperanza, was Big Edie Beale was Jackie's dad's sister.
Right, her aunt. Mm-hmm.
And Jackie's aunt. And I mean, how do we really define the storyline of the Big Edie? Just people that just fell from grace, they lived in this grand manner. And this part we're getting, Gail Sheehy, who was a great writer, and actually really documented her relationship with the Beales. And I think maybe we'll just go into that just to give the background, Esperanza.
Sure.
Okay.
How it happened, right?
How it happened. It was, and Gail Sheehy relates, and this is a New York Magazine story, The Secret of Grey Gardens, which goes back to 1971, 52 years ago.
Yes.
And Gail Sheehy writes, it was the summer of 71. My family had rented a place across the street from what my then 7-year-old daughter called the Witch House. So this was 1971 that this house looked like this. And for anyone who doesn't know where Grey Gardens is, this is Appoquog Lane and West End Road. From the files of Good is Always Good, that's good real estate. All right. Could we say that, Esperanza? That is
always
primo. I mean, primo real estate. But in 1971, there was a 1937 Cadillac in the tangled grasses near the porch steps of Grey Gardens. A hand-lettered sign hung, "Do not trespass, police on the place." Cats were all over the overgrown grass. There was no turning back. And little Edie, Big Edie's daughter, came out and said, "I'm Jacqueline Bouvier's first cousin. Mother is her aunt." Did you know that?
I love that.
I mean,
name dropper.
Right from the beginning. I've been living in this squalor, but imagine, at the time, this is how Gail Sheehy had a 7-year-old, probably a young woman, renting nearby, and saying, "Oh my God, this is Jackie Bouvier's." You can't imagine. But listen to what Gail Sheehy said. It clicked. The woman before me was a version of Jackie Kennedy coming back from church on a Greek island. But this was little Edie in the summer of 54 because of her 54th year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because she resembled Jackie.
Yeah. And, I never really looked at that. And then it came. Yeah, it did. I made the comparison. I really did. Incredible.
Yeah.
There is a family resemblance for sure.
Exactly. And Gail Sheehy goes on to say how from then on, she was invited into the private world of the Beale ladies, two outcasts of a wealthy and famously dysfunctional branch of the Kennedy dynasty, the Bouvier Beales, who were being hounded by county health officials. And this is well documented. I mean, we've all heard the 8 cats and raccoons and everything living in the house.
Oh, yeah. I've heard direct, firsthand stories about people who were a lot, there.
Yeah. And little Edie took her through the house, and it was just.
I can't even imagine. Oh my gosh.
I can't imagine either, Esperanza, but how do you not love Gail? She was such a great writer. How do you not love this description? It reminded her of a chilling version of Jackie's famous White House.
Yes. I believe it. Like a Vanna White kind of display of, and this is the drawing room.
Because, again, that was sort of part of Camelot of the White House. I don't think before Jackie Kennedy did they open it was the television era and everything else.
Yeah.
And Jackie Kennedy opened the White House. It was, probably filmed for TV. This was never done before.
Right.
This was not the information age we live in now. So she's relaying this and connecting this to that, which is really, I'm just thinking, I'm riffing here. I'm just thinking of this now.
Yeah.
She talks about the once proud mansion lumped and crusty with old cat feces, the roof punctured with raccoon holes. All this documented in the Maysles documentary, by the way. But mother remained upstairs, summoning the services of her daughter, banging her cane and in full operatic tremolo. Edie, my champagne cocktail.
Yeah, where's my champagne cocktail? I mean, the Maysles brothers documentary is so good about that. And then, the Drew Barrymore film. But anyway, I mean,
right.
Like you said, people who have seen those films may know this story. What strikes me about all of this is, I don't know, there must have been, and maybe not so much for little Edie, but we were talking about Jackie Kennedy and her sense of place for East Hampton.
Yes.
I get a sense that, especially for Edie, the mother, this was her special place.
Yes.
And she refused to leave this house, no matter how she was living in it.
Is there any other conclusion that you can draw?
Well, apart from mental illness, no.
Right. Okay. True. Yeah. True.
Which is possible and maybe have been the case, but I think that came across to me in the films.
Yeah.
And then I think we can see that in Jackie Kennedy.
And this is another part from Gail Sheehy's article. And she wrote 2 articles. She actually these are actually excerpts from the 71 article that were within the body of the article, the follow-up she wrote in 2006.
In 2006, yeah.
She did a 35-year retrospective. But, and I love what Gail Sheehy writes here, because this is something I didn't even really think about. Again, passed over by history. The ladies of Grey Gardens were left to the wreck of their lives until sweet revenge. In the 60s, they were suddenly being indulged by a nervous White House. Secret Service cars were posted outside. And now we can speculate, did the president and the first lady not want the way they were living to get out into public view? It was a different time. It wasn't the internet age. I mean, today, if this would have happened, social media would have it in 5 minutes.
All over it like a rash,
like a rash. So, but it was after that story, in fact.
After her story from 1971, right?
Right.
Yes.
That talking about the 60s, correct. Jackie Bouvier Kennedy Onassis came to their rescue with a $25,000 check for a cleanup on the condition that the town would let them stay.
Yeah.
And the documentary Grey Gardens at the Maysles, I think that's the correct pronunciation. Thank you. The Maysles has a line in here how Jackie convinced Aristotle Onassis to donate 32. I don't know if this 32,000 was on top of the 25 or what. Not clear.
Not
but
clear.
Whatever. To donate $32,000 to fix the Beale House, removing what they described as 10,000 bags of garbage.
It's unfathomable how disgusting it must have been.
It really, and again, we're going to start wrapping this up, but
but interesting that this, that Gail Sheehy's article brought Jackie back to her roots.
Right. It completely true. At this point, remember, she was, the Kennedys had a compound in Hyannis, and I think she was spending time in Newport after her marriage also. But yes, this is now, during the Jackie Onassis era.
Correct.
Where she was, where she came across and did all of this. So, just a crazy story. And, Grey Gardens today was ultimately bought by Ben Bradley and Kathleen Sally Quinn. And they restored the house, which must have been a hell of a restoration considering what it was looked like. But they did restore the house to its integrity. Again, it tells the whole family. Jackie's, Carolyn Kennedy, Jackie's daughter, that lived in Sagaponack for many years through 2006. I think JFK Jr. had a presence here too. I mean, that's
probably. But what one thing that stands out to me was that after Big Edie died, that little Edie actually held on to the house.
Right.
And so finally, when Bradley and Quinn bought it, she had resisted for several years from selling it as the term goes nowadays, especially bantered all around, as a teardown.
That's correct.
And thank goodness for that. There you go again, of like this connection to a building, to a place, to East Hampton of the past.
Such a great point. Because this, whatever Big Edie was or wasn't, whether it was mental illness, whether it was just eccentric off the charts, we don't know the answer to that. But that was really such a salient point. That sense of place did resonate to the point that it was that was one of her qualifications, was selling to someone that wouldn't bulldoze it.
Right. And they didn't. Yeah,
she did. Yep. Deserves props to her. And I guess we'll wrap up the story with Lasata, which was still privately owned. And this is now coming from a piece I just took out of Wikipedia, but owned, and in 2006 was offered for sale for $25 million. Currently owned by a former Coach design executive, Reed Krakoff, and his wife Delphine. Was sold. The property was sold into one empty 4-acre plot and another with 7 acres in with the house. Both sold in 2018. And again, if you're driving in East Hampton, walking Further Lane has traffic
it's
like
visible.
27. You can't miss the house.
It's visible from the street.
Totally visible. Yeah. Just past. So, well,
maybe we shouldn't say that. But no,
exactly.
It's a beautiful building.
It's an elegant house and very of its time.
Yes.
Esperanza.
Loved going down this road with you. I just remember my bike rides, and this is like a history that is very familiar, like sort of feels familiar to me as well. So I connect with this very much.
And let's really, because since, one part of Our Hamptons podcast tends to like redundancy, let's wrap it up with where we started. Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy Onassis, born in East Hampton.
Born in East Hampton. Wow. Well, Southampton, but of East Hampton.
Born in Southampton Hospital, but yes, we'll call it true. We'll call it East Hampton. Esperanza, thank you.
Thank you, Irwin.
Until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.